and welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is the second in our series of strategic pricing webinars. I'm Patricia Kingston. For anyone who doesn't know me by now, I'm the Corporate Events Officer at Tourism NI, and I'm going to be facilitating today's session. This webinar is being delivered as part of Tourism NI's ongoing Tourism Enterprise Development Programme, and today we're delighted to be joined by Tony Haren from Admor Business Solutions. Today, Tony's going to be building on the learnings from last week's session and showing us how to apply your policies and decisions to help you grow your business strategically. If you have any questions at all for Tony during the main presentation today, please be sure to pop these into the question box in your control panel at any time, and I'll pick up as many of these as I can at the end. So now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Tony Haren. Good morning, Tony. Great to have you back with us again.
This morning, thanks again everybody for attending, and thanks Patricia for the invitation to present today and to talk about strategic pricing again. So this morning's webinar is essentially a build on top of the webinar one. I also mentioned last week that I did do a webinar at the end of October, which had some elements of pricing for profit and for cost built into it. So this really is building on top of those webinars. And really what I want to do this morning is develop a little bit of more strategic thinking into the pricing that people do. I think everybody listening today is obviously now with the weather better and the openings and all the things that are happening, it's getting into really live season, particularly in the tourism and hospitality sector. So what I would like to do this morning is take you through various steps. It is quite a busy morning, so it is something that there's quite a lot of detail. And we will be sharing resources. I'm going to take you through some of the resources as well. So it will be important that you can actually take in whatever details that are absolutely relevant for your business. And there may be other parts of it that maybe aren't quite so relevant, but that's okay, because obviously we're talking to a number of different businesses from across the sector. So what I'd like to do is just start and talk about the elements of this morning. And what I want to do is talk about the pricing and put pricing in context. So I did this the last time as well. It's really important that I do that because pricing is not a single isolated item for any business. It's something you've got to build other things into. So you've got to make sure that you take all of those pieces and put them all together to come up with what's the ideal pricing for you. Last week we talked about the pricing to self-evaluation, and that was a resource that was put up on the website. And that was to encourage you as a business to actually make sure that you were looking at your business, you were looking at your pricing, you were looking at your services, what you offer, looking at your market and everything to do with that. We will look today at pricing strategies in a little bit more detail. A lot of these are high-level strategies, but it's sometimes useful to look at them and say, that's the sort of pricing strategy that I would need to adopt for my business in these particular circumstances. We then will look at planning and forecasting, and we're going to look at that in the longer term. Because pricing is something you do look at and do regularly look at, but it's not much good to you unless you do something with it. It's really important that you take it and you do something with it by expanding your outlook and looking forward from the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks into the longer term. And that's why strategic pricing is really important for businesses. It's not about just deciding your prices today, tomorrow, next week, although you have to do that as well. We're going to look at implementation of that, and we're going to just show you how you can bring that into your business, and then we're going to look at the next steps as well at the end of it. So you'll see coming up is the context, and these two, again, are slides that I shared last week. The more astute of you will notice that there's now 4 Ps in the marketing mix, or sorry, 5 Ps in the marketing mix. It was 4 last week. So I've added in the people, but just for completeness. And the point of this slide here is to explain that in each of the, whenever you're looking at price, you've got to look at price in terms of where it fits with everything else. So it's not an isolated thing that you look at and something you come up with on its own, but you look at the product, the place, the people, and the promotion side of it alongside that. So everybody's reasonably familiar, I'm sure, with the marketing mix, but it's important when you're looking at price that you think about the broader and bigger picture. Yeah, the 5 pillars of good business finance, we talked about that last week as well. So really, when I meet a business for the first time and they have financial issues, I look at that in the context of other financial issues. So if they say to me, I have an issue with pricing, or I have an issue with bookkeeping, or I have an issue with the cash flow or financial management or funding, then I look at each of what I call the 5 pillars. The first of them is good bookkeeping. The second is having a reliable accountant. The third one, which was a lot of what we did last week, which is around pricing and looking at your business model and the products and services you offer, the channels you use. The fourth pillar is adequate funding. And the fifth pillar then is regular oversight and planning. So last week we touched on pricing within this context. We will again look at it this week. But this week we're going to move to this fifth pillar here, the oversight and planning. So this is really the part of a business that I find when I speak to small businesses, not many of them do it. So maybe you do have a plan for every year, maybe you write it out, maybe you go through a process and you look at a year or 2 or 3 years ahead and you plan. If you do, that's fantastic. Some people do it in their heads, and again, if you've got a head that can take all that information and allow you to implement it, then that's great. But today I'm going to show you some resources that will help you to provide some oversight and some planning to your business, and will allow you to take some of the more, let's say, difficult aspects of pricing into your business, and through a process of forecasting, develop a plan that you can adopt and follow. So when we looked last week, we also looked at the internal factors in pricing. We talked about costs, and I mentioned some of their costs, indirect, direct costs, discounting, route to market. We looked at supply factors, and then in the external factors, we looked at the demand and the competition. And all of those were things that we then brought into the self-evaluation process that we looked at last week. The self-evaluation process last week also had a resource attaching to it. And that resource was a tool that businesses could use. I'm not sure how many of you have actually looked at that and used that yet. I appreciate that we're, the start of this week, we're reopening a lot more, and businesses are busy. So you're faced now with the operational issues in your business. You're faced with the real life, thankfully, the real life, business of selling and making money and all of that. So really, but the pricing self-evaluation process is really to help you to focus on your pricing and to look at it from all the different angles, because it doesn't stand alone. And on that basis, then to evolve let's say a more satisfaction, a greater satisfaction around your pricing and what you charge. So we're going to develop on that theme today. They were the issues that we talked about in terms of the pricing. So using internal and external factors, completing it yourself, reviewing it with others. So it's not something you do on your own, or if you can get somebody to look at it, take an action when it was needed, and then repeat it at least annually. So that's what we did last week in terms of we talked about. So I'm re-emphasizing that's important to do that. If you want to go through a journey of maybe having some confusion around your pricing and how you charge things to people, then I think that you need to just put a little bit more structure around it, and the resources are there to help you to do that. So the self-evaluation template that's on the website, Tourism NI's website, is there to help you do that. So we now are going to look at the 7 pricing strategies, and we're going to look at each one in turn. So they're up there at 7: cost plus, competitive, value-based, price skimming, penetration pricing, economy pricing, and dynamic pricing. So I'm going to look at each one. Now, when I go through these, what I want you to consider is which of these are relevant to your business. And sometimes you'll find that not just one of the strategies is relevant to your business, but a number of them are relevant to your business, because they might be relevant to different sectors, they might be relevant to different services or products that you offer, or there might be some sort of mix in there that you use. But I'm putting them up here today as something to look at, because you need to begin to realize that when you approach something new, perhaps a new venture or new service that you're offering, that a lot of people I've spoken to find it difficult to actually get to the point where they can have a price for something. So it's important that you start at the beginning. So my suggestion is starting at the beginning in terms of your costs, and looking and seeing what they are to deliver the product that you're offering. If you already have the service, make sure you know the cost that's built into it. And we did previously as well look at a template for putting in your costs and putting in your income, and looking at the amount of money that you could or should make on one of your services. In fact, you can do it for each of your services. So I also say at this point, I mean, I've been faced with a few businesses here starting up. Either starting up a brand new business, it's maybe a new walking business or a tour business or something that they do, and they're wondering how to charge. And I think I did talk about an example last week where when I do meet people and I ask them about pricing, one of the questions I do ask is, could you explain to me how you've arrived at your pricing? How did you decide that that was the right pricing that you would like to apply to your business? And quite often it's a little bit of a grey response. It's a little bit muddled in terms of how they got there. So just when I'm looking at cost plus pricing, when it says you calculate the cost of creating your product or service and add a certain percentage to it, that typically does, that is a pricing strategy that does typically relate to products more often than services. So if you make something and you then want to make a profit on that, you can add on a percentage onto that. But it still has some relevance in service industries as well. I will mention at this point as well, if you are thinking of starting a new service or you are thinking of starting a new business that has a service element to it, in terms of trying to get your price point, if you like, for starting, one of the things I recommend to businesses is that they think about a break-even position. I'm sure you've heard of break-even. I didn't cover much last week. I touched on it last week, but we did cover it in the end of October webinar. But the break-even position is really defined as the point where your revenue equals your costs. So the point on any pound after that earned is your profit. So it's important for startup businesses particularly to understand what their break-even point is. So what revenue do they need to generate to cover their costs? Now I say you need to take that a step further, and you need to actually take your break-even point. If you work out that you need to earn £2,500 to cover the cost of setting up some sort of business or service or something you want to do, and it's got to £2,500 to set it up, and you need to generate £2,500 just to cover those costs. The next step I recommend to businesses is that they should also put that over a timeline. So you should put that over a timeline, because it's okay saying you'll earn £2,500, which will cover your costs, and therefore, anything above that will be profit. But if it takes you 6 months to get to that break-even point, you've got to understand that you're running at a point then probably you're losing a little bit of money up until the point where you just break even. So you've got to make sure you can live with the timeline for break even. And if your break even is 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, you've got to look at that in the round and decide, is that something that I can fund to the point where it'll break even. So if you are trying to start out, I think the point is to work out what your break even is, look at it over time, and then you need to, at that point, then start applying some additionals to the actual full cost to get to your price that you want to charge people. So that's important. I wanted to emphasize that just around the break-even side. So competitive pricing is the second one. You set your prices based on what the competition is charging. I think again last week I did mention a business that I have met, and the only basis that they set their price was on the competitive pricing. So they looked at competitors that they had who were high and were low, and they went somewhere in the middle. And I said that can be a good strategy, because you're not the highest, you're not the lowest, but it doesn't differentiate you. So it really is important to use that in the round. I'm not saying you don't look at competitor prices when you're setting your own, because obviously if your customers, your clients who want to avail of your service are doing that, you need to know where you fit within that. We'll talk a little bit more of that later on. Value-based pricing is one that a lot of businesses aspire to, because this is where you set your prices according to what consumers think your product is worth. Now that can be difficult as well at times to understand what that is, and that can be a difficult price to get to, because you're meant to do it for every product that you have, or service that you offer. So you're meant to look at each service on which there's a price and look and say, well, I'm charging this, but what do I think people would actually pay for that? So I think it's important that that you understand how they're thinking about it, and if you can get to a point where your price is value-based, then that probably means you're going to maximize your pricing, and people will be very happy because they're getting your service at a price that they value, and hopefully that's going to be enough to make you a good return. Price skimming, one that is a difficult one to implement, and you need to be very careful about. But you set your prices as high as the market will possibly tolerate and lower them over time. It's often used for new products coming to the market and possibly new services as well. So basically, when you're entering a new market, you set your prices high because nobody is offering what you're offering, and you can set them quite high, and people will, will buy them. And then as other competitors come in, perhaps, and start eating into some of your market, you then have to start thinking about lowering your prices. Slight difficulty with that is that, if you want to have some long-term customers, some of them may not be that happy to have to pay a high price at the start, even though the prices start coming down over time. And if you're lowering your prices over time, you've got to be conscious that you don't want to lower the value or the experience for the customers. Penetration pricing, again, based on competition. So you go into a market and you offer prices that are much lower than the competition. That's generally around businesses that want to create a market share. So if you're entering a brand new market and you want to get into it and you want to create your brand and an image in that, and you want to get as many people as possible buying from you, then you basically go in at a lower price than the competition. Again, because no pricing strategy is absolutely perfect for each business, you've got to just look at them in the round. But if you go in with penetration pricing and you offer lower prices, you've got to realize that over time, those lower prices presumably are going to be ones that aren't making as much money. You will have to raise your prices over time. And some customers who bought from you at the lower price may not be happy that when they go back again, maybe for a second element of service, that they're going to have to pay a lot more for that. So again, you've got to do that with caution. Economy pricing, again, you price a product cheaper than the competition and make the money back with increased volume. So similar to the previous one, you're basically get in and pricing your product cheaper than the competition, but you can do it high volume. You can get a lot of people through the door. You've a big venue, you've got a lot of people that you can mass, you've got lots of opportunities. You can run 10 different events over the same weekend at different venues. You can run that. So you can actually price that a lot cheaper because you can get the volume in. That's again one just to be careful of, because you've got to make sure that you can reach the volume. Not that easy for new businesses coming to the market. So maybe for an existing business, you would think about something like that, where you could, or maybe you want to get into a new sector or a new service that you want to offer. You would think about bringing that in. And then finally, one that we've looked at is you can look at is the dynamic pricing strategy. Just where you constantly change your prices to match the current demand for the item. So this is very popular, as I'm sure you know, with airlines and indeed some hotels and some places where people book online. It's also, I think Amazon have sellers that use it as well. So when they suddenly see there's a big demand for their item, the prices go up. And there are some businesses that get away with it, or there's an expectation that's what you would have to, you have to pay maybe a higher price. So like of airline seats, if you go in trying to book a flight in a week's time, unless they're offering something to fill up some empty seats, you're typically going to have to pay a lot more. One example would be obviously the corridor opening to Portugal recently, and the prices of flights to Portugal went through the roof. In fact, I think they went through the roof just before the announcement. So there was so much sort of leaks to the media and stuff that Portugal was going to be on the green list, that people were in booking the flights early. So again, it's just another strategy which you can think about in terms of applying to your business. It may not be suitable, but just be careful about picking a pricing strategy that doesn't match your business. I'll put this next slide up here just in relation to dynamic pricing. It's not Northern Ireland, but it came across just in the last few days. It's England basically, and this is for accommodation providers. And this is really the average cost of a week's staycation. They did this survey in 10 popular destinations between the 17th of July and 24th for a couple and a family of 4. So you can see there that basically you've got a 2020 price and a 2021 price for various areas, so just regions, if you like, in England. And on the left side, or the middle column, there's a couple column, and then the family of 4. So if you've got a calculator, you'll probably be doing some sums in that to see what the increase is. But the increase, I did a quick calculation on most of them. So the increase is somewhere between 11 and 15%, maybe some a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but they're in that general range, 11, 12, 13, 14% of an increase. And that probably in the market, I would imagine, isn't deemed unreasonable. There was some news I know recently about Cornwall particularly. I know it is listed there. And in Cornwall, I think there were people charging pretty high prices for a week to stay in self-catering and holiday accommodation. Like substantially higher than what would have been charged in 2020. And the reason being, people aren't going abroad yet. The flights have only just opened. Many people have already made their plans for the summer, and people are choosing to stay on the staycation side. So the danger in using dynamic pricing in the wrong way is that if people see that you're trying to make too much money out of something because demand is high, then that could have a long-term consequence for your customers, and particularly the customers that you are keen on in terms of the getting them back for repeat business, etc. So again, that's something to be very careful about, but it's a strategy. Okay, so we're now going to go and have a look at pricing and planning. So what this little part is about, this part of the webinar is about, is you can do all the work you want on pricing. You can come up with what you think are the best prices for your business and for the services you offer. But unless you do something with that and you apply it to your business, it doesn't really matter. So what I'm saying is that, and this is one area that a lot of businesses I come across don't do much of, which is forward planning. I did mention it earlier, but really what I'm going to encourage here is that you think about planning for your business. And I'll show you, there's a couple of templates that I'm going to use now that are relevant to helping you to do that. One of them is going to be on pricing itself and the sales and the numbers and the forecasting side of it. And the other part of that is the planning side, so how you link that. So when I talk about this, when I talk about planning here to businesses, I typically am talking about planning as opposed to producing a big business plan. So business plans are reasonably popular with startup businesses. I'm not sure how many of you start out business with a business plan, or many people just set up your business without a plan. You just launched into it and off you went. Business plans are a good idea for startup businesses, and there is support for that from Invest&I through the local enterprise agencies that will help you to do a business plan if you're wanting to start up in business, and they're free. But if you're an existing business, it's to go and begin to write a big business plan unless you're planning a major expansion or something that requires a real lot of deep thought. It takes a lot of time, can be time consuming. My difficulty with business plans is, while I do think they're very valuable for startups particularly, and they are useful for businesses who want to maybe expand and perhaps need some funding for that, and they need to go to a bank or an investor to seek funding, business plans can become stale quite quickly. So basically a business plan is written at a point in time, and it's based on the market, what's going on, the products, the services, competition, talk about research, you look at costs, you look at trends in business and all that type of thing, trends in the market, and you bring all those together in your business plan, and you get some forecasts beside them, and you can get that in a neat box. But I do some one-to-one mentoring with it's a program of Belfast City Council. It's called Kickstart, and it's for startup businesses. And one of the criteria to come onto that program is that they need to have a business plan done through the Go For It program. So if they want to join Kickstart because they're starting a business, they move them aside first of all to get a business plan done through the Go For It program, and then they get onto the Kickstart program, and then they need more information on if they need help with financial planning, financial management, pricing, forecasting, whatever they get referred to me. In almost every case, when I've met the people who are on Kickstart and they have done their business plan, most of them haven't looked at it since it was built and developed. So they took it at the time. They said it was very helpful to help them to frame their thinking, frame their thought processes, and get an idea of the income and the earning that they might make from it, the costs, etc. But they weren't using as part of their business. So what I'm going to show you now over the next few slides and through the resources that I'm going to share is a couple of tools that can help you to bring pricing and planning into your day-to-day business. So we're going to look at those now. I'll just mention this. So implementation of most things over the longer term needs a plan. That's what I think. That plan can be written. It can be verbal. It can be or in your head. It can be whatever. I believe it should be written. And that famous quote from Benjamin Franklin: "If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail." I think there's there's an element of truth in that, and I think that it is important that you plan for your business. And I'll take you through the process for that now. So we'll look at forecasting now. So I just share with you the forecast. Just go with me. And I will. Hopefully you can see that. Okay.
Yep, Tony, we're seeing that. Okay.
Brilliant. Okay. So I just conscious with the advanced slide that it may not have worked there. That's great. Okay. So what you're looking at now is a forecasting template. I have shared a version of this on previous webinars, but I use this with businesses who maybe have had a business plan done or have no business plan, and they want to begin to think about how they look forward in their business. So if you're running a business now today in end of May 2021, really you need to be thinking about how you want your business to look and feel in May 2022 or May 2023, or at the end of this summer, even if that's just a short-term planning that you want to do. So really important that you begin to think about where your business is and how you need to shape it and change it and work it and adjust it to a point that in a year's time, it's better than it is today. And my recommendations for businesses to do that is just to think ahead and look and see what they can do to shape their business. So this first resource here is it's a forecasting template. So I know that not everybody listening is going to be familiar with spreadsheets and how they work. This is still something that if you get it, you can print it out. You can do it just on paper. You can do it any way you want, but it works best on a spreadsheet, a very simple spreadsheet as I'll show you. And effectively, the point in this here is really to crystallize your thinking and bring your thinking in terms of what you're doing into something that resembles a plan. And whenever you get the plan and you get your numbers and you get your figures out of that, you then can develop that into some targets and things that you can aim for to get. Because one of the questions businesses often say to me is, Tony, how would I know what I'm going to do in November or December or quarter one next year? Sure, nobody knows. It could be anything. And I say, well, that's not quite true. You don't know exactly what you'll be doing. And yes, we don't know the future. Nobody can predict it. But unless you can look at that and come up with some figures that you think are reasonable for your business, you'll just carry on just doing your business, getting whatever comes in the door, getting people booking online, all those sort of things. You might do some marketing to try and drive more activity. If you're in accommodation, get your occupancy rates up. All those things all help. But unless you've got some sort of framework to plan and drive your business, you don't know where you're going to be in a year's time. But if you can get a roadmap, if you like, and I'll show you how to do that in one of the next resources. So really what I'm saying is it's important that you have a good idea of where you want to be in 12 months' time, and then between now and then, how you're going to get there. So the first of the elements here is this forecasting template. So simply put in your business name in this here, and the way this is built, you can see there's 3 tabs. There's a sales budget down at the bottom there, blue, cash flow year 1, and profit and loss year 1. So you haven't much to put into this here. This is kept deliberately simple. It is built around a business and does not include VAT. So if you're a VAT registered business, this does not calculate VAT or do anything like that. It's a much more simple version of that. So I would be recommending that if you're doing this, you put in your sales price net of VAT, and you put in your costs net of VAT. So you can get a sense of what you're actually making on the business. So the way it works is I've listed, in this case, up to 16 products or services. So you simply go in and you let's put in your package. So if that's one of your services, a tour package, you see when you populate that there, it automatically populates down this next little set of columns and rows here, and again down at the bottom. I'll take you down through those. You just simply put in your price if you're charging £25 for it, and then when you're looking at your forecast, you just put in how many of these you expect to sell. Now, people might say, how would I know? How would I know? And nobody knows for certain. But if you put in the figure, so I'd say to people, well, how many would you sell in a week? I don't know if any would sell. Would you sell 100? They go, oh, no, I wouldn't sell 100 a week. Oh, no, I don't have time. No, would it be 2? Oh, no, not more than 2. So you end up getting a figure somewhere in the middle that they say, well, that sounds about reasonable. So we're talking about a month here. So we're talking somebody selling 10 tour packages a week, and they're £25 each. Then we'll say in month one, they're estimated that they will sell 40 packages in June, and that automatically calculates your income. So 40 times 25 is £1,000. So by going through this process, if you decide that I'll probably sell the same in June, July, might get a bit more in August, and through this process, you just populate this with your services. You do get a sense of what your income will be at the bottom, and it adds up to a level of income down here. So this is a way to plan a little bit and to look at this. And when you get it done, if you do it once, you can use this then on an ongoing basis, on a rolling basis. But I suggest that most businesses should do this once a year, at least once a year. You might even do it for every season that you have. You might only want to do it for your summer season, but whatever you do, you should go through some sort of process like this, unless your business is so simple, single service, you know what it is, you can get it in your head. But anyone who's got a range of services that are different or different packages, and they want to look at those, and they want to look at the pricing side of it, because you can play around with this. Because if you're looking at this as a new product and you decided you wanted to, you know, if it wasn't £25, but actually was £20, you know, you can look and see what the impact of that is on your business income, how much less you're going to get. And while it's easy to see for one, if you had 5 or 6 different services here and different prices built in here, and you have different numbers built in across here, you're beginning to build up a picture of what you would expect to do over the next 12 months, if it is a 12-month period. I built in a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. This is built around the time of around COVID. And the phase 1 was meant to be a time when businesses were in lockdown, and they might have been generating some income from certain services like click and collect or takeaways or you know, other types of maybe some product sales that we're doing, but it was limited. Phase 2 would be sort of post-lockdown, maybe as things ease, not back up into full working capacity, but actually up to a point where, you know, you're beginning, the doors are open, maybe there's people coming in, maybe recently you were sitting outdoors as opposed to indoors. So you could look at this in different phases, and then phase 3 was really when we're back up to when things will be normal, the new normal. So you're open indoors, you're open outdoors, maybe social distancing issues are gone, but there is still some health and safety issues, etc., to be done. So it gives you a way to look at each of these phases differently. So again, you know, spreadsheets aren't for everybody. It isn't something that everyone's going to jump up and down and say, oh great, I can do that. But I can tell you, having taken businesses through this process, you're talking about a couple of hours work in total in terms of putting down your services, putting down your prices, and coming up with some sort of information here. When you get that done, you can end up then with your sales targets of how many units you need to sell of each product or service, and how much money you would like to make or intend to make from that. And this becomes your sales or revenue plan. In the second tab, the cash flow, what happens here is the sales from the first tab are carried through automatically. And if you have other money coming in from grants or different things, you can factor them in here. And then there's an opportunity, if you wish, to put in your costs. You can put in your costs on a monthly basis here, and you will then at the bottom get your total costs, and then you will get your net position. So if you have any costs in here, let's just put one in. Let's put in rates, £1,000 or £1,000. You get a total of £1,000 for expenditure, and then you get your that £1,000 is taken off your £800 of income, which we have at the top, and there's a net deficit position of £200. So the benefit of this process, as well as doing some planning and getting some targets, is you can soon see your peaks and troughs. You can see what each, what month, although I put in sort of similar figures here for each month, you can begin to see, well, when your high season, low season is and what it is, and begin to look at how you might close the gaps on that. You might begin to look at that and say, well, September's not a great month, because of A, B, or C, and obviously it's outside your your control, like the weather. There's not much you can do about that. But you may be able to come up with something that's indoor or something that counteracts that. Or you may be able to do some other activity that is linked to somebody else who's got that indoor element to it. So what this allows you to do when you get your plan done is to look at your peaks and troughs, decide what is, what you need to do maybe to adjust what you do in terms of seasonality, in terms of managing to work alongside events and summer events and craft fairs or visitor attractions that are around your area. And this helps you to plan. So this is the numbers side of this. This last tab brings it all together in terms of if you were looking at the next year at a glance, you can see what your profit and loss would look like. So you have your sales, less any costs of sales, which aren't as relevant for service industries, and you can see your net profit on that. So this is not a major exercise to do it. Again, if you were not into spreadsheets and didn't know somebody could help you with this, it would be a matter of just printing this out, putting in your figures. And one thing I suggest to people as well, if you do print it out and do work it, you can track the actuals alongside this by looking at the actual the forecast figure that you've got, and then alongside each of those, putting in what your actual sales are. So if you've 800, 800, and £1,000 of sales forecast for these months, you can write down here what the actual sales are, and you can begin to track and see how you're doing against those. And like everything I say, learn from these things. The whole point in tracking, measuring, and following through on a plan is to see, well, what happened there? Why was it? Why were these? Why was that less? Why was this more? Why was that substantially more? And learn from that and understand and see what you can do in the months ahead to maybe replicate what's going on here. Maybe again be something inside your control, or maybe something outside your control. Okay, so that's the forecasting side of it. So numbers on their own don't make a plan, in my opinion. They're helpful and they give you a framework for looking at your business and taking it forward. But alongside the plan, so the forecast, I suggest you do some planning. And the planning that I would recommend you look at, I have this template again. This is one that will be on the website. Again, hopefully you can see that okay. So the website will have this, and you can use it. Now, this isn't a case study. There isn't time to do a full case study on these webinars, but I populated this plan. So what you would have is a plan that doesn't have any of these words in, okay? Or it may have prompts for these words in. So I've done this for an accommodation business, and I know there's a number of accommodation businesses on the line for the webinar here. So look at that. What I've done is I've tried to think about it from a specific business perspective. If you're not in the accommodation sector, it doesn't matter. A lot of the stuff in this here is still relevant to you. But the point of this part of the planning process is that this actually sits alongside your numbers. So if you've gone in and you forecast over a 12-month period or a 13-week period or a 4-month period, what you would like to do and then what you're now targeting yourself to do, this planning template, it sits alongside that. Now, I've done something differently with this. I normally put in here in these yellow boxes each quarter. So to tie in with your 12-month plan, if it is a 12-month plan, I would put in by end of quarter one, by the end of March, by the end of June, by the end of September, by the end of December. I put this in on this one, particularly because when I was thinking about the accommodation business, I was thinking, the accommodation business is probably looking at the next 4 months is really critical for this year. So, I put in a monthly set of targets here, target dates here. And I've got the end of June, the end of July, the end of August, the end of September. And the way this works is that I say to people, if you want to have a plan that is something that you can follow, keep it quite simple. So I restrict this here to, let's say 2 pages. I think I might have stretched to 3 because I put in a lot of extra words in this. But I'm saying that you use something like this to keep track of what you're doing. And I say the way this works is that you take so for instance, down the left-hand side, I put a number of headings: existing services and offerings, new services and offerings, or collaborations, or joint ventures, customers, web presence, marketing, social media, competitors, overall sales income, overall costs, all these different headings. And against each of these dates, you write in what you need to have done by that date to make it work. So some people, I suggest you start at the back and say by the end of September, what would you like to have done by the end of September to make sure that you've achieved what you wanted to do over this 4-month period? And then go back and say what you'd like to have done by the end of August, and then the end of July, and then the end of June. So I'll take some as an example. I won't go through all of this here because we're limited in time. So what I'm saying here is that if you take your existing services, I'm saying in the first line, all clear, in place, and operational. So by the end of June, whatever services you're offering, they're out there on the market and they're ready for people. In an ideal world, you'd have completed this before now, so you're ready by the 1st of June to have these in place. But I'm just looking forward from now. So this maybe is something you could use next year, or use it from July onwards, so you can do your own planning for that. So I put in things like by the 30th of June, 100% occupancy targets met. So that's what you're aiming to achieve by these dates. You might say, well, I won't achieve that. You might say, oh, I've already achieved that. We're really fully booked. Fantastic. Great. And learn from it. You may have cancellations. You've got to keep an eye on that and make sure you can refill. So again, there's under the existing services, I put in a little bit about pricing. All prices reviewed and adjusted on all sales or sites and brochures and literature. So that's something you need to do. I'll talk a little bit about that below as well. I'll maybe take it down just to the web presence here. All booking sites fully reviewed for photos, brand, text, etc. Google presence and all Google details checked, opening hours, services, photos. That's on your website fully reviewed. I mean, these are really important because I think I said to you, I did some one-to-ones with other businesses in the tourism and hospitality sector, and before I went on the call with them, I had a look at their websites and their web presence, and we went through that. In some cases, we went through them together, and what was on their website, what was on the booking sites, wasn't exactly what the person thought was there. They'd forgotten about what was there. They'd forgotten about words they'd used. Even some of the prices that they had on there were incorrect. So it's important that you know and think about it from what the customer sees. So when the customer sees your offering, if it is an online offering, they see what it is. They can see the images and that links in with the price that they're being asked to pay for it. So it's really important to get that done. So this planning process is about suggesting that you go in and make sure you do all these things. And once a month, you go in and check them again, make sure everything's okay. Any problems there, you fix them. And you do it on a monthly basis to check that everything is current and up to date. Any reviews as well, you check all those. And our customers, we had customer surveys in operation and suggesting information that allows you to reflect on your price. I'll not go through them all, but you've got one here as well, marketing social media, putting in a plan for £100 a month, Google AdWords, if that's the channel you use, or whichever one you use. So just make sure, capturing all your emails, making sure your customers are leaving an email address, that you have that, and that you can begin to market that with newsletters, etc. So not all of this is going to be relevant to you, and not all of this is going to be something you want to do. I put these in as prompts. You can take them out, you can add your own, whatever you want. But I'm saying that if you want to look at a summer period or a 12-month period, it's important that you try to break it down into timelines and say, well, by the end, if I want to achieve what I want to achieve in 12 months' time, I need to know I'm on target at the end of December. I'm on target at the end of September. I'm on target at the end of June. I need to know that. What do I need to do in those time periods to make sure that happens? Again, I put competitors in here. Competitors is an issue that comes up all the time in the tourism and hospitality sector. People are interested in what the competitors are doing. So I'm saying here that there's 5, in this particular case, that 5 main competitors identified. And last week we talked about the strengths and weaknesses, looking at those strengths and weaknesses, and then building on them for your own business, looking at the things they're not good at, the things they're weak at, the things that they're not particularly strong in, and develop your own strengths on that. And then putting in some income targets as well. These income targets would link in, and the cost targets would link in with your forecasts. So that is something, again, it's a Word document. You can print it, you can clear out all the fields and put in all the things you want yourself. You can change the dates yourself as well if you think they're not relevant to your particular business. You can change those. But either way, it's an opportunity to think today about what will happen over a period of time, and at the end of it, you can track it and see, well, did I achieve these things? So the forecasting and the planning template go together. And for some businesses who've had a business startup business plan with forecast, I've used this as a next stage for them. So that is something that's a bit more practical that they can now take. Only a couple of pages, you can print it out. Business plans typically are 20, 30 pages long and lots of appendices and stuff in them. And I say they gather a little bit of dust. This is more of an active and moving type document that I encourage businesses to use. So again, that's a resource that will be on the website. Just go back to okay, so we've looked at the forecasting side of it, we've looked at the planning side of it, and now we're going to look at the pricing policy template. So again, we're talking about strategic pricing here. So strategic pricing means long-term pricing. It's not about making a decision today, tomorrow we're going to charge. That's a part of it, but that's more operational, short-term type stuff that you need to make decisions around. But if you're thinking about long-term in your business, you've got to think about long-term pricing decisions, long-term things that you need to do to make sure that you evaluate, as we did last week, and that you make decisions and they actually implement them. So this week is about implementing these things and getting them done. So we are now going to have a look at the pricing template. And just get this up. Okay, so again, hope you can see this. So this is really a pricing policy. So this is taking all the things you've learned so far and building it into a policy for yourselves. So you would actually take this and build into it. So what we've taken and looked at over the last week and a little bit of a webinar in previous period last year is taking a step back and looking at your pricing and building up into something that you can say, here's a framework for how I approach pricing. This is what I actually do in my business on pricing. Here's how I review it. Here's my policy, and your policy can change, but it's about coming up with this. This may be a step too far for some businesses in terms of saying, well, I don't need a pricing policy, I know what I'm doing. But I would still encourage you to write something down. Just get it down and make sure that it makes sense and get yourself challenged by people, get other people to look at it as well, make sure it's right. So we're just going to very quickly look through this here. Again, it's a simple Word document. Again, you can adopt it to your own business. So what I've done here is just talked about the area that you're looking at, your details in terms of, let's say, our services. We provide accommodation or walking tours or food and drink, activities, etc. And here are the services that we offer. We charge the following prices, and you list them what they are. So you write it down and say, this is what we do. And you look at your target market, you write down. So this is getting into a bit of marketing as well. But I've driven these webinars on the back of the pricing side of it, on the back of the income side of it, in terms of the income and costs. So it is important that you write down who your target markets are, because they, depending on who you're targeting, you could be targeting people with a bit of money. You could be targeting, particular niches of the market who are willing to spend a little bit extra on some premium product or premium activities. People who've been cooped up inside for the last 12 months and are now willing to break out a little bit and spend some money on themselves and on their families. So, but I'm saying that it's good to write it down. So this links into the previous areas, because this actually pulls all the other areas together. This actually brings it into saying, this is our business, this is our policy, this is how we approach pricing, and this is something that you would look at and review, again, probably once a year. It may be you don't need to adjust it every year, but just look at it and make sure that it's up to date. And you cover sections like your seasonality, what our high season is, what our low season is, any other seasonally high periods that we work to that are good for us or that maybe aren't good for us. Again, a little bit of analysis on competitors. So you do all of those things, and then once you've listed those things, the second part is actually to write out what your policy is. So we review it every year, or when a new service launches, collaborations. And then you bring in one of the strategies I've talked about. So we look at those 7 strategies on the slides. And it's an opportunity to bring in those and look at them in the context of your policy, and then talk about the predominant policy strategy that you use for your main products or services. And that's the one that you use. I put in here that maybe you want to focus on value-based strategy and why that's the important one for you. Again, writing these things down sometimes helps you to crystallize your thinking and just to be clear, bring clarity to your thought in terms of what you want to do. And again, if you're on your own, show it to somebody, bring it to somebody else, let them challenge you on it. And then ultimately, when you get to the point where you've got this finished, you've got a policy, you go and approach it. You go and implement it. That's approach to seasonality. Again, we've talked about earlier what the seasons were and what we do about those. Why we discount, if we discount, your competitors are. How we actually review the competitors. So all those things, and there's parts for others. And again, it's a simple document, a couple of pages long, little couple of boxes there if you want to put in other headings or things that you want to look at. I mentioned feedback there in terms of getting how you get feedback from customers and how you learn from that, particularly around your pricing. Are you giving value for money? You keep up to tell yourself you are, but if you get feedback from customers that actually says that, you know, and if you have, fantastic, get those testimonials up on your website or on your booking sites or wherever, and make sure that people know that actually, of course, that is good value for money. It looks a bit dear, maybe, you know, actually people say it's good value for money, so it's worth the extra few pounds. Okay, so that's the third resource now. So the pricing policy. So the first was forecasting, second was planning, and then pricing. Each of them on their own, I don't think is a huge amount of time. I've tried to populate some of these to give you some starting point on them. You may decide just to have a totally fresh approach and decide that you work off a blank one. Again, these are word-based documents. If you want to print them out and do them by hand, you can do that. But all of these things are meant to try to bring pricing from something like a difficult topic down into something that's a lot more understandable. So I'm just conscious of the time here, so I'm just going to race back to the presentation now again, and we'll go through a wrap-up process. So a quick recap over the two webinars: pricing isn't standalone. Understand the bigger picture, the context. Pricing for profit, the starting point for any business looking to make money is to price for profit. So look at your break even and what you would need to generate above that to justify the time and effort and risks that you're taking on your business. Do a self-evaluation and do it regularly. Step back and have a look at your pricing, look at how you've arrived at it and why you think it's logical. And then consider the short term, which is dynamic pricing, perhaps supply and demand, short-term gain. Consider the impact on your business in the longer term if you get that wrong, and how some of your regular customers who maybe don't like the thought of having to pay a lot more just this summer or this week or this month. Consider the longer term, which is what I've been trying to talk about. It's a strategic approach to pricing. I think you should be looking at. So look at customer feedback, customer retention, referrals, and planning, and then finally develop a policy. Have a policy and have a flexible approach to that, not just competitor based. Review your pricing regular and do some planning and forecasting in there. Just make sure that you have a framework, if you like, for your business. And again, I'm not suggesting you take every single one of the resources and use all of them in your business, but they're there for you. Maybe pick the ones that are most relevant to you, the ones that you can use and you think will add most value to your business. Final thoughts: pricing isn't easy. Pricing needs longer term strategic thinking, and it doesn't have a magic formula. So when I say that last one, people get hung up a lot in pricing in terms of, I don't know if this is right, I don't know if this is right. So I've given you some thoughts on how to, maybe with a new product or service, how you develop a pricing strategy on that, and how you build up using your costs as to what you think is a fair price to charge and a good price to charge. But I'll leave you with one thought, that basically it's important that once you get through this process, that once you decide on your pricing, it's important to have confidence in that. If you have worked through a process that you've analyzed your competitors, you've looked at your unique selling products, you've looked at your brand, you've looked at the value for money that you offer, you've looked at your costs, you're making a good return, you've got a good share of the market, or you're getting a good share of the market, or you're offering something totally different to other people, or you're working strategically alongside somebody else. If you've looked at all those elements and you've come up with your pricing, have confidence to go out there and market your business on that. Don't worry then about if the competitors are charging you less, because you've been through that process. You know they're charging less because you've looked at what they do, and their strengths and weaknesses, when you've analysed them, tell you that you're actually in a better place than them. But then make sure that you and your marketing promotes that it's got it front and centre of what you do. So if you're saying, and a lot of businesses, you know, you don't necessarily lead by price. You shouldn't always lead by price, because people may make a decision around something based on all of the things they're going to get for that, and then look at the price and say, oh, well, that's okay. If you lead by price, that will bring it very much into people's faces, and they will look at the price comparison. I know there's price comparison sites. I know Booking.com, and there's other sites, Expedia and TripAdvisor, and all those things where people go in and they can, you know, list them by lowest to highest, etc. Once you decide on your pricing and you decide that it's right, market on that basis. Finally, just choose your target and what makes sure make sure you understand what you're offering, and just implement. Next steps: consider the pricing strategies, develop a written pricing policy, use your pricing to plan and forecast ahead, track, review, and adjust. Thank you. So a little bit beyond the time. I knew it was quite a lot to cover today, so I am happy now to take questions.
Thank you so much, Tony. Yes, as you've mentioned, lots and lots of information to digest there today. So just a reminder to all the industry joining us today, as always, we're going to be sharing a link to a recording of this morning's session along with a copy of Tony's slides. So you can review it again at your leisure, or if there's a specific section of the presentation that's particularly of interest to you, you'll be able to go back and watch that again and look at the individual slides. As Tony mentioned, I'll be sharing your questions with him very shortly. So if you have a question and you haven't popped it in the chat just yet, feel free to do that now. And just before we get stuck into your questions, I'm going to do a couple of very, very quick polls just to get a feel for how useful everyone's found today's session so far. The first one should pop up on the screen here shortly. So how would you rate today's session in terms of content and relevance to your business? So that's on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not relevant at all and 5 being extremely relevant. So I'll just give you a second to fill that in. Great stuff. And the second one's just a really simple yes and no, and it's just, do you plan to take action within your business as a direct result of what you've heard today? So just a quick yes or no there, and it just really helps us make sure everything's on the right track. And as always, we'll be issuing a short survey via email after the session, so that'll give you the opportunity to let us know if there's anything else you'd like to see within the TED program over the next year or so. We're currently developing our upcoming program, so any input from yourselves is really, really appreciated, and it's a really important part of that process. So Tony, thank you so much, and I know we have filled our hour, but we'll still do a couple of questions here, and if anyone needs to slip away, you can check in on the recording again afterwards as well. But Tony, I suppose just very quickly, first of all, you mentioned quite a few resources there, so I suppose I'll just let everyone know we will also put those up on our website and share a link to everyone here today to those. So can you just remind us what people will have access to after today? I know you've run through them over the course of the presentation there.
Yeah, there are 3 templates, Patricia. The first one is we looked at was the forecasting one, so that's the numbers side of things. That's right. Suggest businesses start if they're thinking about doing some planning. It allows them to go in and actually look at their own business, look at their products, services, the pricing they charge, and begin to build up a picture of the number of those that they would expect, hope to sell, and then let that move itself into like a target for themselves, and they can put in their costs as well into that. The second one is the planning element, which sits alongside the forecasting. So the planning bit is more words in it, and really it's around giving people a framework to be able to set and establish sort of time limits and milestones and things that they need to get things done by. And again, it's in a word format. I have pre-populated the template with an accommodation provider, but it can be used for any business. It's about, and I've done it on the basis of a 4-month period just this summer because of the nature of it. But it could be done by quarter. People can change that and make it by quarter or by month or by season, whichever people want to do. And the final one there is pricing policy, which is trying to bring together a lot of the elements we've looked at over the 2 webinars and allow businesses to begin to crystallize their own business in terms of the pricing that they charge and the pricing elements to that, and build in a review process for that so that they can actually look at it continually and make sure and validate that it's right.
Fantastic. So lots of really, really useful resources there for everybody today. And as I say, we'll be sharing this recording and links to those resources as soon as we possibly can, just once we have the recording ready from today. So we have a couple of questions through here as well. The first one is Tony, someone wondering if you would have any particular advice on calculating pricing for a business plan in relation to a completely new venture. So if you're starting from scratch, any advice there?
Yeah, if you're a brand new venture starting up and you're looking for a business plan, I'm not sure, obviously I don't know the background to it, but there is I think I mentioned during the webinar there is a support through the Go For It program, which is funded by InvestNI, and it's delivered by local enterprise agencies, and they provide support to businesses to develop their own business plan. So they get a business plan and forecast, and it doesn't cost anything to do that. So if you are thinking about that, it is a good place to start to help you to crystallize things. Within that, there will be a focus on pricing. So the local enterprise agency advisor should help you with that and go through a process of that. They do go through processes like look at market research, primary research, secondary research to show there's a demand for the product, etc. So I would suggest that the person asking the question should think about the Go For It program to get the plan done. And then in terms of the actual pricing element within that, if it is a new product, new service, then what I said earlier about the break-even point, make sure you establish what your costs are. Make sure you know, and make sure you gather in all your costs. Look at then what income you would need to generate just to break even on that, and spread it over a period of time. And say, well, it will take me 6 months or 9 months or 12 months to break even. And can I fund that in the meantime? But then if you say, well, no, I can't, then what you need to go and do is put your take your figures, if you like, and instead of just having a break-even position, then build your price up on top of that to show how you will begin to make a profit earlier in that process. So the Go For It program probably first, and then do some sort of break-even analysis on that, and do some sort of forecasting out, and then look at your pricing against competitors and probably raise that to a point that you think that that's right. And again, bring in all the other elements like unique selling point, demand, location, and all the things that are going to make people want to buy that because it's different and creates value for money.
Great, thank you so much. We've got a question through here on the tour guiding sector. A group of tour guides who are working collectively together, but their individual costs are varied or depending on what roles they're each doing. So, have you any recommendations for how you would price, set your price in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, that brings in its own additionality, if you like, because you're bringing together 3 different businesses, all with different business models, all different things and different aspirations in terms of their business. But if you've got 3 people who genuinely have collectively come together and they want to deliver a package of something, and they're all on the same platform in terms of that, yeah, I suggest there's probably a bit of modeling to go into that, but maybe a difficult one to answer in the course of a minute or so. But I would suggest that the starting point again would be to establish the product itself and look at the total costs across the businesses. And at that point, I'm not talking about the time element. I mean just the pure costs of actually building it, and then look at the time element of that and the time element of each of the three tour guides in terms of what time they would spend on it. And arrive at a pricing structure that they believe is marketable. And once they have that, it's actually important that at that point that they, and this brings it into a little bit beyond pricing itself. Well, it's important that all of the 3 businesses are clear on the time they spend on it, because I've seen other ventures where there's 2 or 3 people involved, and one person spends this amount of time, and somebody else spends a little bit less, and this person and decide to spread the money evenly. So yes, we're generating. I do know a partnership now, and the 2 people work together, not in the tourism hospitality sector, but a partnership, and every job that they do, they split 50-50. That's just how it works. And maybe a plan that splits the income across 3 people is a starting point. Just a third each, if that's what it is, all the income coming in. But I do find that it's often difficult to get a business where everyone spends exactly the same amount of time. That somebody does spend a bit more, or somebody uses some of their resources, that others aren't using, and they need a bit more. So that's something that needs to be sat down at the start. Everybody needs to be very clear on that. And I would suggest, as an aside to that there's an agreement between all parties. It's written down and it's clear. It's not just a pricing issue there. There's a business model, a structure issue, and you don't want some fallout later on because somebody says, "Oh, flip me, I didn't know you're getting all that money and I'm doing all the work," and all that type of thing. Get it sorted at the start so there's no issues or rise. So either through a contract or a service level agreement or some sort of arrangement that everyone signs up to and says, "I'm happy with that." So starting point would be total costs against market demand, and then each individual business builds up and says, "Well, if I get a third of that, would I get enough from that? Should I get more than a third? I'm going to argue I need to get half because I'm doing all these other things." So there's just a process for that, Patricia. Probably a lot longer answer than I thought, but there's probably a lot involved in that question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I suppose it's making sure there's really clear rules for each of those for each of the guides. If it's not 3 identical splits, which it's very unlikely to be, absolutely, that's really useful. Thank you. We have someone here who we're back to the sort of tour operators question, which I know we touched on the last time, but some tour operators are asking for prices for 2022 and 2023. Obviously, those operators, they do plan so far in ahead. So can you give some advice on sort of, is there a standard recommended percentage increase per year? If you've decided what your costs are this year, what's the best way to kind of do an early prediction or an early costing for 2022 and 2023, Tony?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, difficult, but it probably doesn't even looked at in the context of the business itself and the tour operator or not. But probably some just broad guidelines in that. When I'm looking at forecasting for businesses, I would typically look at costs broadly, rising at 2 to 3% a year, because that's inflation or just a bit above inflation at the moment. So that's a way to look at your costs, unless there's some sort of specific costs that are a bit more move a bit faster or could be a bit more unpredictable. But as a rule, about 2%. In terms of your income side of things, I mean, I always say get a starting point in your own mind and then work from that. A starting point in my mind for price increases that people in general would say maybe sounds reasonable, about 5%. So again, I'm putting out a figure here, but I'm saying it's got to be, you've got to caution against that. 5% is a figure that people could probably justify in terms of just trying to cover their 2.5% costs, and then maybe get another 2.5% of profit on top of that. So I think people would look at that as reasonable. You may decide, because of the nature of what you do, or that you're going to enhance the services in year 2 and year 3, you're going to add on bits to it, that a 5% increase isn't enough. It's got to be 10% or 15%. Looking at the slide I put up earlier with the English accommodation providers, I mean, they were putting their prices up by between 10 and 15% in a year. I would suspect if you come in at that sort of level without having an add-on of extra services or extra things you were offering, a tour operator would probably challenge that as a minimum, certainly blink at it. So 5% is a starting point, and I would say you work from there and try and justify a little bit more if you do go above that.
Very good, thank you so much. We have a question in here from a street food business. So they presently do their food costing at 60% with VAT. So that cost price is based on the purchasing of the food. But how do they cover running costs as well, or do they need to fit that all into 60%? I presume they mean 60% of what they charge is the cost.
Yeah, probably need to maybe ask another question or two about that, but I'm guessing it depends if the street food business is VAT registered or not. So the VAT threshold is 85,000. So if they're generating more than 85,000 a year, then obviously their sales price will include VAT, their cost will include VAT, and then they can recover the VAT on the input side. But if you're not VAT registered, if that's a below £85,000 a year business, then obviously you'll not be charging VAT on your sales, and you will be paying VAT on your costs. So if you're paying VAT on your costs, that's just a cost. So if you're paying something for £10 plus VAT of £2 and you can't recover the £2, you're paying out £12. So that's just a cost. So I would just put those costs in, including VAT, if that's the question. We presently do food costing at 60% with VAT, and the cost price is based on purchasing food. How do we cover running costs? I maybe need a bit more clarification on that. I mean, typically in a food business, there's no standard across every single sector, but you are talking about typically in a food business that the likes of the actual food cost versus the selling price would be about 30%. So you're talking about a 70% markup, if you like, on that. Street food is slightly different to a restaurant, because restaurant would typically have more overheads and that, more staff involved in that. So again, you probably would need to personalize it to that, Patricia. So I probably need to know a little bit more about that before I answer it. But in terms of the whatever way you price it up based on your cost in the industry standard. And then if you're premium and you're offering a little bit more and you're unique, or you've got a single point and it's the only one on the street or wherever it is, then you could charge a little bit more on that. So I'm not sure if that's going to help the person or not. Might need to know a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for all the questions today. And that actually leads us quite nicely on, because Tony has very kindly offered to agreed to offer a limited number of one-to-one follow-up sessions. So it might be worth those guys getting in touch with us, and Tony, you maybe having a bit of a chat directly with them, and you can advise better. But if you are interested in a one-to-one chat with Tony, drop me an email at industry.development@tourismandI.com. Just includes the details of what your business name is, what sector you're in, and also include a contact telephone number for me as well. We do have limited capacity for these. We've lots of people on these sessions, and we've only got one Tony, so we can't guarantee a slot for everyone, but we are doing our very best to accommodate as many as we can. We have a few requests already through from last week that Tony's working his way through. So if you have already requested, we're on the case. But if you hadn't so far, and you think it would be really worth following today, having a chat with Tony, then do please get in touch with me at that email address that's on screen now. Also, you can see tourismandI.com on the screen. That's our industry website, and you can find details of all upcoming webinars there. If you head to the Build Your Business section and then head to the Events and Webinars link, and also that's where you can find recordings and support materials from all of our previous TED webinars, and that's where we'll be putting all the resources from today up as well. So we'll aim to do that as quickly as we can. So I think that we've kept everybody long enough. Tony, I know lots of people are reopened now, so we'll let everybody get back to work. But thank you so much for today and for last week as well, and for all those really useful resources. And thanks so much to Barry and the team at Eventful as well for keeping things flowing. I think my sound might be going a bit funny, so hopefully you can all hear me okay. But thank you so much everyone that joined us this morning, and we'll hopefully see you again very, very soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Have a great summer, everybody.
Yes, absolutely.